Hey gang, good morning. This is Pastor Jonathan with Robertsdale United Methodist Church. I've had some technical challenges this morning. I've actually recorded this video multiple times, so here we are live. I'm so glad that you could join me from whenever and wherever you are. We are continuing to look at John chapter 21 as we look at the post-resurrection story of Jesus and him appearing to his disciples. And the past couple of days we have found Jesus on the shore of Lake Galilee as the disciples have been fishing all night. They have this miraculous catch after they do exactly what Jesus tells them to do. And then they join him for a fish and bread breakfast over charcoal fire on the shore. And Jesus is talking with them, and he specifically zooms in on Peter. And yesterday we talked about the conversation they had where he asked Peter 3 times, "Peter, do you love me?" And then he gave him work to do. We're going to continue that conversation and pick up a few verses into where we left off yesterday. So John chapter 21, starting in verse 18, and I'm going to read through the end of the whole book, which is verse 25. So John 21, 18 through 25. "Very truly I tell you," Jesus said to Peter, "when you were younger you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you were old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw that disciple who Jesus loved was following them. This is the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" And when Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Because of this, the rumor spread among the believers that this other disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say he would not die. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?" This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. Jesus says to Peter, "Follow me." Jesus has been saying this since he first called his disciples. And as I read this story, I realize a struggle that many, many of us have, and that is the struggle of comparison. We compare ourselves to other people, and it hit me recently that this struggle of comparison, as harmless as it may seem to others, is actually a form of envy. Envy is one of the 10 commandments. It's one of the most basic foundational laws of God that we should not want what others have. And God's pretty explicit about this. He says you're not to want your neighbor's spouse, you're not to want your neighbor's house, you're not to want your neighbor's stuff. But all of those things are material, and maybe you don't feel like you struggle in that way. But what about your neighbor's reputation? What about your neighbor's status? What about your neighbor's luck? Maybe you feel like your neighbor has good fortune and their circumstances seem so much better than yours, and you don't understand why these things keep happening to you, or why these things happen for other people but don't happen for you. All of that is a form of envy. It's a form of constantly comparing ourselves to others when we're supposed to be fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Peter has this moment right at the end of the resurrection story, and I think it's a significant one, because when Jesus says to Peter, "This is what it means for you to follow me," Peter's first response is to look over his shoulder at the other disciple, who we believe to be John. And it's significant to note that in the Gospel of John and in the other Gospels, rarely does anything happen with Peter and Jesus that John is not also there. And in the book of Acts, as Peter goes on ministering and becoming a leader in the church, John is with him so many times. They do a lot of ministry together, and yet Peter says, "What about him?" And Jesus says, "His road is not the same as yours. And what's it to you what I have planned for him? You are to follow me. You follow me. You don't concern yourself with what it looks like for him to follow me." So today my message, and what I believe the message of God for us is very clear and very simple. Say no to comparison and say yes to calling. Ask yourself what it looks like for Jesus to call you. What does God have in mind for you? And don't concern yourself with other people following Jesus if that leads them down a different road than God has for you. We've each got a row to hoe in the harvest field of the kingdom. God has work that only you can do. And in your mind, that may look abundantly greater or abundantly less than the work he has for someone else. And that is not our concern. Say no to comparison. Say yes to calling. because Jesus is looking directly at you and has certain things in mind when he says, you follow me. I hope that you will look for ways to follow Jesus today and pray about what that looks like and what that means for your life. Many times we think fairness is one of the rules of the kingdom of God. And we say, Lord, how can that be fair if someone else's calling looks different than mine? And Jesus says, it's not fair, because it's not about comparison, it's about calling. I hope this blesses you today. I would love to know if this impacts you and if God is speaking a specific word to you through it. Please leave that in the comments below. It's a beautiful morning. I hope that you have a beautiful day and are filled with the blessings of God. This is Pastor Jonathan of Robertsdale United Methodist Church wishing you grace and peace.